Commander Xaltrax stood at the helm of the flagship, gazing out at the swirling depths of space. The alien fleet had arrived in the solar system silently, and without fanfare. Their mission simple and unremarkable. As far as he was concerned, he had led countless expeditions across the galaxy and seen countless civilizations, some great, some barely worth a mention. But Earth had always been a curiosity, a speck of blue and green among the stars. He had read the reports, of course. The humans were primitive, that much was clear, their technology crude, and their society fractured at best. They were a young species on the brink of something, but what that something was anyone's guess. And that's what brought Xaltrax here to this insignificant little world. His assignment was clear: observe, study, and assess whether humanity was worth the trouble of their attention, or whether they were merely a blip in the vastness of the cosmos. The reports had all suggested that Earth was nothing special. The humans were too divided, their achievements too few, to warrant any serious concern. Their technology had only recently reached a point where they could send objects into space, but they had no real mastery of the stars. There was no advanced weaponry, no superhuman abilities to worry about, at least not yet. They were weak and disorganized, and in the eyes of his people, they were simply another species destined to be brushed aside by the inevitable march of progress. That was the view Xaltrax had come to hold even before arriving. Now, standing before the enormous viewport of the flagship, his hands folded behind his back, Xaltrax reviewed the data once again. Earth's population, nearly 8 billion, scattered across the planet, each group living its own fractured existence, small factions constantly at odds with one another. They fought wars, they struggled with their environment, and yet despite it all they survived. They endured something Xaltrax found perplexing about them. There was an undeniable persistence, a strange refusal to be erased. Even in the face of overwhelming adversity, it was not something his race had encountered often in other species. When faced with challenges, their instincts often turned toward submission or retreat, but the humans, they fought, they adapted, they learned. Still, Xaltrax was unconvinced. His task was simple enough. There was no need to overthink it. Watch the humans from orbit, track their movements and behaviors, evaluate their responses to stimuli, and gather whatever information he could about their society and culture. It would be a standard mission, no different than any other he had conducted countless times before. After all, how could a species with no real unity, no real direction, pose any significant challenge to the advanced technology of his people? He was certain the data would support his conclusions, and his mission would be over quickly. The fleet had established its position far enough away from Earth to remain undetected, and yet close enough to observe the surface in fine detail. Xaltrax had access to an array of surveillance tools that could provide him with more than enough information to form his report. Soon he would begin the observation process, and it would all be over soon with no real surprises or complications to arise, he thought, but deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that something would change, that this mission might not be as easy as it appeared. Xaltrax instructed his fleet to begin the observation process immediately. His ships were equipped with the finest technology, capable of scanning the surface in incredible detail with precision far beyond what humans could ever imagine. The first images they gathered were of a bustling city, the streets filled with humans moving about their daily lives. Xaltrax watched them closely through the feeds as they interacted with one another, a flurry of activity, but nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. They appeared distracted, consumed by their own existence, and yet there was something strangely compelling about the way they moved. He focused on one particular scene, a child playing alone in a park. At first glance, the sight seemed nothing more than another fragment of the humdrum human life, a young girl running around kicking a ball and laughing. She was dressed in brightly colored clothes and appeared completely oblivious to the world beyond her small bubble of playfulness. Xaltrax had seen countless species engage in play. It was a universal phenomenon among young creatures, something to foster growth and development. But as he watched the child, it became apparent there was something more happening here. The girl did not simply chase the ball with the usual abandon he expected from other species. She seemed to direct her movements with purpose and skill. Even though the ball was erratic, it bounced in strange ways, as if it had a life of its own. Yet the child adjusted. She calculated her movements, anticipating where it would go, and every time the ball went astray she adjusted without hesitation, without even a moment of confusion. It was as if she had learned to adapt to chaos, and in that chaos she thrived. Saltrax leaned closer to the feed, his eyes narrowing. There was something unusual about the way the child played, something unique. It was more than simple instinct, more than mere reflexes. The girl was engaging in an act of creation. She was turning randomness into something she could control. Saltrax's initial skepticism began to waver just a little. He had expected to see an ordinary human child running around chasing after an object with little thought behind it. But what he was witnessing was something else entirely. The child was experimenting, learning, testing new movements, and refining her technique as though she were solving a puzzle. Saltrax zoomed in on her actions, studying the subtle movements, her shifts in posture, her focus. As she moved from one attempt to another, he was beginning to realize that this was not a random act of play. There was an underlying strategy at work. He had seen creatures in the galaxy attempt similar feats, but never with such a level of self-correction and creativity. It was like watching a young scientist figuring out the laws of physics firsthand through pure experimentation and instinct. The commander had spent his life studying alien behavior and human activity, had always been deemed simple and predictable, but now as he watched this child in real time, a new thought began to take root in his mind. This wasn't just play, this wasn't just the harmless behavior of a naive species. This was something deeper, something that set the humans apart from anything he had encountered before. Saltrax couldn't help but feel the first stirrings of doubt creeping into his thoughts. Perhaps there was more to these humans than he had initially believed. Saltrax's curiosity deepened as the child continued to play, unaware of the intense scrutiny she was under. With each successive movement, her strategy became clearer. Her actions were not simply the product of chance or the mindless repetition of a creature learning to navigate its environment. No, this child was systematically exploring the world around her. Each trial was a hypothesis, each failure was a result to be analyzed and adjusted. Her movements shifted ever so slightly with each new attempt, as if she were trying to perfect a process. And that realization struck Saltrax like a bolt of lightning. This wasn't just a game, it was a study in adaptability and resourcefulness. He watched as the child kicked the ball in a different direction this time, sending it high into the air. It bounced off a tree branch and flew sideways across the park, landing some distance away. She paused for a moment as if considering her next move, and then without missing a beat she sprinted after it, not with the frantic energy he had expected, but with a clear and calculated pace. She closed the distance and without hesitation kicked the ball back into the air, but with a different angle this time, allowing it to bounce off a nearby bench and roll perfectly in her direction. Saltrax was stunned. The child's behavior was not random, it was intentional. It was as if she had a complete understanding of her environment, how to use it to her advantage, and how to make the unexpected work for her. He had seen countless species across the galaxy and had studied them in exhaustive detail, but none of them had exhibited this kind of ability to adapt and manipulate their surroundings with such fluidity, in a way that was so natural. He realized that this child wasn't just learning how to play, she was learning how to master the world around her. The commander ordered his fleet to monitor the child more closely. He instructed his technicians to track her movements with even greater precision. He wanted to understand what made her tick, what drove her to continually experiment and adapt. She was clearly more than a simple creature guided by instinct and necessity. There was an intelligence behind her actions, something more profound than he had initially assumed. He watched as the child's face lit up with a moment of triumph after successfully landing a perfect kick against the park's fence. She laughed aloud, a sound so pure it seemed to echo in the silent observation room. Saltrax had expected to see the usual reactions that came from such behavior, the joy of accomplishment fleeting and shallow, but there was something different in her expression, something deeper. It was as if she was experiencing not just the satisfaction of achieving a goal, but the exhilaration of discovery, as though each success revealed new possibilities and unlocked hidden doors to further exploration and understanding. The child's joy was not from winning the game, but from expanding the boundaries of what she could do, what she could learn, and how she could push herself. This realization shook the commander even more profoundly. It wasn't just the child's ability to solve problems, it was the way in which she approached them that fascinated him. Her desire to experiment, to learn from failure and build upon it, made her unlike any creature he had ever encountered. Humans didn't just survive, they thrived by constantly evolving their thinking, adapting to challenges, and creating new solutions from the chaos that surrounded them. Zoltrax's mind began to churn as the implications of what he was witnessing started to settle in. This was not a species to be underestimated. This was not a world to be easily dismissed. There was something in humanity, something dangerous, something that had the potential to change everything. And it was staring him in the face through the actions of a simple child playing in a park. Zoltrax's mind raced as he continued to observe the child. There was something almost unnerving about her ability to adapt so quickly. She wasn't just solving problems, she was rethinking the very nature of those problems, transforming what seemed like a random game into an exercise in problem-solving and experimentation. He zoomed in on the child's movements, adjusting his sensory filters to track every minute change in her posture and reaction, every shift in her focus. It was like watching an artist perfect their craft with each stroke of the brush. The child wasn't simply playing anymore. She was testing boundaries, learning how to stretch the limits of what was possible. The commander began to experiment himself using his fleet's advanced technology. He decided to subtly alter the environment, just to see how the child would react. His ships deployed drones that created small obstacles within the park. An unexpected patch of mud appeared in the child's path, followed by a tree branch that fell close to her path. He watched with keen interest, expecting the child to falter, perhaps to grow frustrated or confused, as most young creatures would when their surroundings were disrupted. But to his astonishment, she did not even flinch. Instead, the child slowed her pace just slightly to assess the new obstacle, and then without hesitation, she made a decision. She took a step to the side and leaped over the mud patch, her feet landing firmly on the other side, her balance unshaken. She continued toward the ball with a renewed sense of purpose. The fallen branch had been nothing more than another challenge to her understanding of the world, and she had already adapted to it. Zoltrax could not believe what he was seeing. This was no longer just a simple game. It was a study in resilience and creativity. The child didn't just deal with the obstacles. She incorporated them into her understanding of the environment. She learned from them and moved forward as though nothing had changed. She had turned a disruption into an opportunity to refine her approach and build her skill set further. It was nothing like anything he had encountered before with any other species. When faced with unexpected challenges, most beings would hesitate. They would stop and recalibrate. They would look for the easiest solution. But this child was pushing forward. She wasn't just overcoming the obstacles. She was absorbing them, making them part of her process and adapting with every single step. Zoltrax adjusted his focus once again, following her every movement. She took another path, this time heading toward a small hill on the edge of the park. The terrain was uneven and more challenging than the flat ground she had been running across earlier, but she didn't hesitate for a moment. She sprinted toward the incline, her legs pushing off the ground with deliberate power and agility. Her eyes locked onto the ball, which had rolled down the hill earlier. She was already planning her next move, calculating the best way to climb and retrieve it without losing her momentum. The commander's amazement grew even further. How was this possible? How was a child with no formal training able to navigate such challenges with such fluidity and intelligence? It was as though she had been born with an innate understanding of the physical world around her, of how to use every element to her advantage. Zoltrax had never seen anything like it before in any species he had studied or encountered in all his years of exploration. As the child finally reached the ball and kicked it back into play with a perfect trajectory, once again Zoltrax felt the weight of his earlier assumptions fall away. He had thought humans were nothing more than a young species with little potential, but now he was beginning to question everything he had believed about them. This child embodied the essence of humanity in a way he hadn't even considered before. Their ability to adapt to the unknown, to turn obstacles into tools, and to thrive in an ever-changing environment was something far more profound than he had ever expected. Zoltrax could hardly tear his eyes away from the feed. Now the child's movements had become more than just fascinating. They had become almost mesmerizing. Every action seemed deliberate and precise, even in her moments of spontaneity. There was a hidden layer of calculation and foresight. It wasn't just that she could adapt to her environment. She was shaping it in ways that suggested a depth of intelligence he hadn't expected from a species so young, so primitive. He had watched countless species engage in problem-solving before, but nothing like this. The way she used every setback as an opportunity to grow, to push herself further. It was almost like witnessing a master strategist at work, only this strategist was a child playing in a park. His attention was no longer on the ball or her immediate goal, but on the entire process, the way she framed each move as part of a larger picture, and how she treated every failure as a necessary part of that picture, as if each misstep provided vital information that would help her succeed the next time. Zoltrax's mind reeled. He had studied advanced tactics, military strategy, and complex algorithms used by the most intelligent beings in the galaxy. But this child, this human child, seemed to embody a kind of pure, unrefined genius, a genius born not from calculation or programming, but from something more primal, something deeper. He had expected humans to be predictable, but they were proving to be anything but predictable. Each new action the child took seemed to defy any algorithm or logical pattern Zoltrax could apply to it. There was an unexpected quality to the child's behavior that seemed to break all the rules he had learned to rely on in his years of observation. She wasn't just reacting to the world around her, she was interacting with it. She was transforming it, bending it to fit her needs, no matter how chaotic the circumstances. She was constantly rethinking her environment in real time. Zoltrax leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the console. As he zoomed in on the child's face, she wasn't just focused on the ball anymore. She was caught up in the excitement of the challenge itself. It was as though she had found a new purpose in each attempt she made. Each failure only strengthened her resolve to succeed, not for the sake of winning, but for the sake of understanding. This was a thirst for knowledge that went beyond simple survival or success. It was a hunger to engage with the world around her and to push the limits of what she could achieve. The commander felt a strange stirring within him as he watched her face light up with each moment of success. But it wasn't just the triumph that captivated him, it was the way she celebrated it, not with boastfulness or pride, but with a quiet sense of wonderment, as though each victory revealed a new layer of the world she hadn't known before, a new depth to be explored. Zoltrax had never seen anything like it before in all his years of observing countless species and cultures. This wasn't mere competition, it was a way of life, a driving force that seemed to live at the very core of humanity. His thoughts turned inward for a moment as he considered the implications of what he was witnessing. If this child was any indication of the species as a whole, then perhaps his initial assessment had been deeply flawed. Humans were not simply weak, they were resilient. They were not simply chaotic, they were adaptive and resourceful in ways that defied reason. They were not bound by the limits of their environment, but seemed to transcend them through sheer determination and creativity. Zoltrax had always thought of the universe as a place where survival was determined by strength and intellect alone, but what he was learning about humanity was forcing him to reconsider that belief. The child's ability to grow from each obstacle, and the joy she took in that growth, made Zoltrax realize that perhaps the greatest strength of humanity was not in their technology or their weapons, but in their ability to create, to bend reality to their will through nothing more than willpower and imagination. Zoltrax's fascination with the human child reached new heights as he sat back in his command chair, reflecting on the complexity of what he had just witnessed. He could not deny that the behavior of the child was something he had never encountered before. He had seen advanced civilizations with sophisticated technology and intellectual power beyond measure, but nothing had prepared him for the raw potential of this small human creature. Her ability to adapt to every challenge without hesitation was unlike anything he had ever observed. The commander knew that to fully understand humanity's potential, he needed to dig deeper, to push the limits of what the child was capable of, and to test Whether this extraordinary adaptability extended beyond simple play, he decided to take a more active role in her environment, deploying more subtle challenges into her path and watching with bated breath as she responded. His ships released a drone that hovered just above the child's field of play. It was a simple machine designed to simulate a mild distraction, something to test how the child would cope with an external force entering her world. He watched as the drone emitted a soft hum and drifted lazily in her direction. The child barely acknowledged the sound at first. She was focused entirely on the ball as it bounced erratically across the field. But as the drone moved closer and closer, she paused just for a moment, her head tilted as though she had sensed the intrusion into her space. Zoltrax watched her reactions carefully. Would she panic? Would she freeze? Or would she alter her behavior, as she had done with every other challenge he had thrown her way? She looked at the drone for a moment, then with a fluid motion she resumed her play. As though nothing had changed, her attention shifted to the ball again, and her movements became even more deliberate as she worked to correct the ball's erratic path. The drone had become nothing more than an afterthought to her, a brief curiosity that she dismissed with ease, as if it were nothing more than another obstacle to adapt to. Zoltrax was stunned. The child had simply ignored the disruption and returned to her task without skipping a beat. She was so focused on her objective that even the most unusual of distractions didn't disrupt her flow. It was as though her mind was always several steps ahead, as if she were aware of every possible variable in her environment and had already determined how to deal with it. He wasn't done testing her yet. Zoltrax decided to introduce more challenges this time, a series of subtle environmental changes that would require more creativity and flexibility. He adjusted the landscape of the park, making the terrain less predictable. A pile of rocks appeared out of nowhere, blocking her direct path, forcing her to find a new route. He watched eagerly as she glanced at the rocks, and then without hesitation veered off to the side to bypass the obstacle. Without slowing down, her movements were swift and confident as she navigated the change seamlessly, as though she had already anticipated this shift. As the child neared the rocks, Zoltrax deployed another test, a sudden shift in gravity designed to subtly alter her balance and force her to readjust her footing. Once again, the child reacted instantly. She planted her feet firm and steady, adjusting her stance and her movements accordingly without ever breaking her stride. This was beyond anything Zoltrax had ever imagined. No other species he had encountered could adapt to these changes so swiftly and with such ease. The child was constantly recalibrating her approach to the environment, the terrain, her own body movements in response to everything he threw at her, with the precision of a creature who had honed these skills over generations. And yet she was so young. Her body had not been forged in the fires of battle or refined by years of training. She was simply playing in a park, but her behavior suggested a level of instinctual intelligence far beyond what he had thought possible. Zoltrax could no longer contain the swell of respect that was growing inside him for this human child. Her ability to overcome every obstacle with such ingenuity was unlike anything he had seen in any other species he had studied or encountered, and now he could see it clearly. The human mind was a force of nature, one that could not be easily contained or predicted. Their true strength lay not in brute force or in technology, but in their endless capacity for adaptation and innovation. As Zoltrax continued to observe the child, a strange sense of awe began to settle in him. The intensity of his initial mission, the cold calculations, and the careful analysis he had performed on countless other species felt distant now, almost irrelevant. This human child was showing him something far more profound, something that defied all the expectations he had built over centuries of exploration. The way she interacted with her world, constantly adjusting, reevaluating, and overcoming obstacles, was a testament to an adaptability that went beyond survival. She was changing her environment with each step, learning to shape her reality. It was as though the very core of humanity was driven by an unyielding will to master and evolve, no matter what the challenge. Zoltrax, still perched within the quiet confines of his command chamber, wondered if he had underestimated humanity entirely. He had expected them to be a fragile, fragmented species, ripe for easy control or domination. But instead, he was witnessing a species built on resilience, on an endless cycle of growth and reinvention. There was a fire within the humans, an untamed energy that could not be snuffed out by simple hardship. Instead of succumbing to difficulty, they became more determined, more resourceful. The child, oblivious to the unseen scrutiny, began to approach a new section of the park where a makeshift hill had appeared. Zoltrax had ordered his drones to subtly alter the landscape once more, hoping to challenge her further. As the terrain shifted underfoot, the child faced a new incline. The angle was steeper than before, and the rocks had shifted into a nearly impassable slope. It was a challenge even for an experienced adult, yet she approached it without hesitation, as though it were a familiar puzzle, one she had solved countless times before. As the child crouched down and adjusted her footing, Zoltrax realized something else. It wasn't just that she was problem-solving in real time. It was that she had an innate confidence in her ability to find a way through. It wasn't about simply succeeding. It was about the act of overcoming, of pushing forward even when success seemed uncertain. This was what set humanity apart. Their relentless pursuit of progress, their constant testing of boundaries, and their unwavering belief that, in the end, they could adapt and triumph. The child grasped the rocks for balance, feeling the subtle weight changes underfoot as she slowly ascended the slope. When her first attempt didn't yield the expected result, she immediately shifted her approach. A second attempt, a third, and then a fourth. Each time, the child adjusted her stance, recalibrating her center of gravity until, with a final leap, she reached the top. Her face lit up in a bright smile, her eyes gleaming with the pure joy of accomplishment. Zoltrax's mind raced. This wasn't just a matter of survival. This child, and by extension, humanity, was driven by something more profound than mere instinct. It was a fundamental drive to explore, to grow, and to transform. She wasn't simply overcoming obstacles. She was transcending them, adapting not just to the physical world around her, but to the very nature of existence itself. The commander couldn't help but feel a shift within himself. He had thought he understood what made species successful. Strength, intelligence, technology. Those were the hallmarks of a species that could thrive. Yet here, on a tiny, unremarkable planet, he had encountered something entirely different. It wasn't the mind alone that made the human so formidable. It was the human spirit, their will, and the belief that, no matter the hardship, no matter the challenge, they would find a way. Zoltrax had seen countless civilizations fall, and he had seen many others conquer, but never had he seen a species so fundamentally alive. These humans, small frail creatures compared to the vastness of the galaxy, were not just surviving. They were building, growing, and changing. There was a fire inside them, an unbreakable will to overcome, to keep evolving, to keep reaching for something more. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Zoltrax began to question everything he thought he knew. What if humanity was not just another fleeting civilization? What if they were a force, a new kind of power in the universe, something to be reckoned with, something that could shake the course of the cosmos itself? As Zoltrax sat in the quiet of his command chamber, watching the child's play unfold before him, his thoughts drifted toward the broader implications of what he had witnessed. The child, with her boundless curiosity and tenacity, was a microcosm of something far greater. Humanity was more than just a young species on the verge of technological advancement. It was a species driven by something much deeper, an insatiable drive to grow, adapt, and evolve. In the vast expanse of the universe, he had seen countless species, but none had displayed the raw, untamed potential that humans did. What he had thought was weakness, disorganization, chaos, lack of unity, was, in fact, the foundation of something far more powerful: creativity, resilience, and innovation. Zoltrax's mind raced with the implications. He had been tasked with observing, calculating, and reporting back on humanity's potential for advancement. But as he watched the child conquer each obstacle with ease, he realized that this mission was no longer about analysis. It was about understanding. understanding a species that wasn't bound by the rules of the universe, but that bent them, that shaped them with every action, every attempt to learn, to grow. Humanity didn't just adapt to their environment. They transformed it, and in doing so, they transformed themselves. It was no longer a question of whether they would become a force in the galaxy. They already were. The question now was what would happen when the galaxy took notice. The child had reached the top of the makeshift hill, her face flushed with the exertion, her smile wide with accomplishment. She stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, but with a look of pure satisfaction in her eyes. To Zoltrax, this wasn't just a child playing in a park anymore. This was a demonstration of what humans were capable of. A species that could take whatever the universe threw at them and find a way to not only survive but to thrive. It was this ability to constantly overcome, to adapt in real time, to turn every challenge into an opportunity that set humanity apart. Zoltrax's mission had been simple: observe and evaluate. But now, as he observed the child, he felt a deep respect for this species, respect for their potential, for their unyielding will, for their capacity to innovate even when the odds seemed insurmountable. He had seen civilizations rise and fall, but humanity, was something entirely different. They were not simply surviving in an unforgiving universe. They were shaping their destiny. The commander's thoughts turned to the future. What would happen when humans discovered the rest of the galaxy? How would they respond to the larger, more powerful species that dominated the stars? He had no doubt that they would face their challenges just as they had in this park, by learning, adapting, and ultimately overcoming. But unlike any other species, humanity had an inherent ability to create solutions where others saw none. They didn't just react to the world around them, they changed it. And with that ability came a power far greater than anything Zoltrax had anticipated. The galaxy would soon learn what it meant to encounter a species that could alter the very course of the cosmos, that could thrive in places where others might falter. Zoltrax took a deep breath, his fingers resting lightly on the console. He had come here to assess humanity, to determine their place in the universe. But now, for the first time, he wondered whether it was humanity that would determine his place in the cosmos. The child's play had shown him something far more significant than mere survival. A species driven by an unrelenting drive to grow, to innovate, and to push the boundaries of what was possible. He realized, perhaps too late, that humanity was not something to be studied or controlled. Humanity was something that would change everything. As he leaned back in his chair, Zoltrax understood with crystal clarity. This mission was not the end of his journey. It was the beginning of something much larger. Humanity was no longer just a curiosity. They were a force to be reckoned with. And the universe, for better or worse, would never be the same.